Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. If you're new to the Authority File, you can listen to and find previous episodes on most of the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and on our website, choice360.org. We also encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter, the Authority File Roundup, which keeps you updated on previous, current, and upcoming Authority File episodes. You can subscribe at choice360.org by clicking on the newsletter banner at the top of the homepage. In this 4-part series, which is provided with support from Sage Publishing, my guests and I take a close look at the undergraduate workflow, basically defined as a student's learning experience. As we do this, we'll pay particular attention to the ways in which the relationships between the library, teaching faculty, and students can be optimized for better learning outcomes. Joining me are Samantha Sharman, who is currently a student at the University of Lincoln, a public research university in Lincoln, England, Jamie Wood, professor of history and education at the University of Lincoln, Ian Snowley, Dean of Student Learning Development and University Librarian, also at the University of Lincoln, and Matt Hayes, Managing Director of Technology at Sage Publishing. In this final episode of our series, we situate the librarian's involvement in the student and faculty workflow by looking at how these kinds of services align with what might be considered more traditional ones. We also take a closer look at the contributing factors of sluggish student engagement. I'm wondering, in what ways does a librarian's involvement in the student and faculty workflow differ, if at all, from what might be considered, traditional services? I think Matt brought up earlier the idea that, libraries are now moving into that service orientation or have been. Is this kind of a new thing in terms of working into the student workflow in the context of this discussion for academic librarians, Ian?
I suppose, to be fair, it is new for some. I think we know that our workforces and our colleagues are always on something of a continuum in terms of their approach to life and work. And there are those who are always out there pushing the boundaries, and perhaps there are always those more familiar with a sort of controlled environment and the library as a sort of place of sanctity. But I think for us, it really is the only way to go. We haven't talked about this, and again, there's these issues of difference between the US and the UK. It's perhaps more recent that the UK has a consumer-based higher education system, but it is still an important consideration. Our students are effectively paying a fee. They will pay the cost of their education back through their taxes over quite a long period of time. So there's a very, very real kind of feeling that they are paying for what the services they get. And I think that just produces a sort of responsibility on us to provide the most useful and most effective education, that we can't sort of look back to a different way of doing things in a sort of more rosy world when students were kind of self-sufficient and took what we were providing and accepted it. They're consumers. They want to have an experience that sets them up for what they want to do in life. And that means we need to refine our services. We need to develop. And the point that's been made already by Matt, I think, is to take on those changes in society. And we're still seeing, we've been through a period of very rapid and remarkable change in terms of the response to COVID. We're still processing what that really means and what it means for the world of work. But it certainly suggests to me that we need students that are very resilient, very flexible, very confident and capable of responding to a world that could be very different from the one they're starting out in. And I think that really does produce a strong responsibility for institutions like ours to really think about how best we can support students and not think about our structures and how we want to be organized. And I think that's the real key here. I think it's unfortunately true that I think I can say this, that librarians have previously been responsible for sort of structuring things a little bit too much around their own kind of views of libraries and what they want to do. And again, to go a little bit full circle to the research, what we need to do is make sure we structure our services and what we offer around students' expectations. So clearly the research element and the student voice is critical to that, but also being willing to change is critical to that, and to perhaps throw out some of the certainties of the past and embark on a slightly uncertain future, but in a way that is open and positive to change.
Right. Well said. Sam, I wanted to check in with you and ask a little bit about sort of student engagement and perhaps the lack thereof and what's causing that. But, some of the things that Ian just spoke about in terms of there does seem to be, or always have been these very high expectations of students. And I imagine that kind of factors into the engagement formula there. But, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, what tends to, uh, I guess, hinder the engagement of students in all of these things we've been discussing.
Yeah, well, on a very practical, basic level, just the accessibility of resources, if they're difficult or even slightly hard to actually access and open and read and use, that's an immediate barrier to some students. Some students will just see a URL link not working and think, well, I'm not going to do that reading then. It is that fundamentally basic and primitive. I mean, there is broader accessibility issues in terms of, students with learning difficulties and needing to not appeal to those broader audiences, but consider those needs as well.
Right.
But also there's the element of a lack of guidance. So again, it's quite basic in the fact that if students aren't directed at least a very little bit in what to do or how to approach their reading, if they're faced with a really long reading list and a lot of work to do, they will just quite often say, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do it, essentially. It can get overwhelming quite quickly for a lot of students, and that key phrase of overwhelming or confusion came up a lot in these survey responses and in the focus groups as well throughout the research. So it's definitely a strong sentiment of not knowing what they need to do or how they need to do it, and just backing away and saying, not gonna approach that.
Yeah, I imagine if they do manage to approach it, they're approaching it at the very last minute, and that can kind of conspire to make their work less effective or of a lower quality than they would like, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
Okay. Matt, I'm wondering, how you see sort of technology kind of facilitating some of these issues. Like, where does that kind of fit into this equation?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I was just sympathizing mentally then with Sam on the sheer volume of content that is out there now.
Yeah.
And reflecting as well on, just ignoring the past and focusing on the future and focusing on the right now, that there's never been so much content thrown at all of us, but particularly those that are studying and researching. And so that would be one good example of where digital tools could come in and help. So connecting to Ian's point about this idea of the library embedding itself in the undergraduate's workflow at the point of need, and the point I was making about that core mission of the library, we think that the library could embed itself when undergraduates are discovering content and provide those helpful indicators to say, whoa, don't look at that. That's something that we don't know the origin of, and we wouldn't necessarily recommend that as a good starting point. But this content over here, we think that has all the hallmarks of well-researched content with appropriate peer review protocols in place and so on. So I think there could be support there that a digital tool could enable, so the library can continue to provide that curation support to undergraduates. And if you think about it in terms of where we are now versus where we were in the past, when I was studying, that was like, let's say it was 15 plus years ago. There's definitely much less content than now. And it was very easy to know these are the core articles you need to read. They're all on JSTOR. or they're all in the library, and you're in the library because there wasn't really the same kind of online learning approach there. There definitely wasn't a pandemic. So it's much easier to know what to read and how to find it. Whereas now, if it could be, you could be presented ebooks that are behind a paywall, or it's a chapter from an ebook that you're not quite sure how to access. I think that's where digital tools can really help, because it's definitely not in the interest of anyone for an undergraduate, when their core focus should be on understanding about history or psychology or whatever, to actually be working out the details of, proxy and link resolvers and all these complicated things. They should just be able to get to that content. So I think that would be a good example, and I'm sure there are lots of others as well.
Yeah. Ian, I see you shaking your head or nodding your head vigorously to what Matt is saying. Sounds like that would be helpful from your perspective as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are some real challenges, and I think Sam kind of brought them to the fore pretty well. Interestingly, your point, Sam, about broken links putting people off. We spend huge amounts of time checking links simply because that we know how big a problem that is. And again, thanks to Talis, some of that has been systematized, but it is still something that takes a lot of time and is really important to do, but isn't actually probably one of the top things that we'd like to do. It should be solved by the system. But actually, I do want to pick up the other sort of barrier that exists, and Matt really has referred to this in passing, the dysfunctional ebook market. That remains a real challenge for us, because we can put ebooks in front of students via the reading list, but we will still struggle to have the right licensing to allow them to access them when they need to. And they may find that you're allowed sort of 3 concurrent users, which seems particularly arcane in this day and age, and the 4th person logs on and the book's not available. And those things are really challenging, and students really don't understand why those things don't work like a Kindle, where the book is there and you can just read it when you need to. So there are some real challenges in the marketplace that we occupy that partly are technical, but are really business practices, and really do need to be resolved, I'm afraid.
Yep. Yeah. Jamie, do academics tend to have an awareness of that, of those issues, or not really?
I think so. I think to some degree we've got a really good subject librarian, so she gives us things to read, and some of us read them, and then you get an awareness of that sort of thing. I think also through debates that are perhaps more focused on research around stuff like open access and stuff like that, it kind of opens you up to thinking about the wider kind of infrastructure that, or lack of it, that supports or doesn't support engagement with texts. I think I did want to add something as well, which was to the sort of discussion that was just being had around like digital overload, broken links, all of those things. I think there's also a sort of platform overload, in that there are loads of different platforms that and I'm not just talking about the platforms for ebooks or for library systems, but if you think within the university, there'll be the virtual learning environment, there'll be various other platforms that connect to or sit within the virtual learning environment, and there's anything that reduces the number of clicks, I think, is a very positive thing, and anything that either, I'm not sure we can reduce the number of platforms, but that makes them integrate with one another more effectively, that makes the tasks that we're asking students to do integrate into one space, so it replicates like the notebook, like that every, or the folder with your notes and your readings and all that in it, that has it in one location, I think is potentially would be a positive thing, because it can just be very confusing for me, never mind for a first year student, to be going through all of those different logins and platforms and stuff. I think.
Sam, is that a struggle that you've seen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from personal experience, I don't know how I managed to survive first year, because I just used JSTOR on the library website and completely ignored all of the forms of platforms, which I strongly do not advise, obviously. when you get to uni, especially from a sort of Lincoln experience, one of the things they tell you to do, when you're researching your first set of essays, is you need to check not just the library and not just JSTOR, but each sort of individual database as well. And that is just kind of overwhelming and tedious that you'll go on and you'll be thrown up with like 100 plus relevant resources, and you're like, well, how do I actually figure out based on the title and keywords which ones I should, potentially be reading?
Yeah.
It's definitely quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that, Bill, actually? Because I think it's such a good point. And there's an example I can think of recently where I had come across an ebook that I wanted to access via Google. I was taken to the publisher's site, and of course they didn't know where I was from, so they didn't know I had access. But more than that, they had 2 different sites for their ebooks. They have one site that has the metadata for all their ebooks, so all of the, the title, the author, etc., as part of a website that has all of their content on it. And then they have another site that has the actual file for the ebook that you can access. And so on the site that I went to, even when I had logged in with my university credentials, they weren't able to give me the ebook because it was just metadata and it was just saying it's not available. And then it's only when I worked out, I need to go to this other sub-site where all their ebooks are stored, that I could then use my university credentials and work out that the university had access to it and get the ebook. And that was quite a Sherlock Holmes type process. And also in that process, multiple occasions, I was given quite intimidating price points, which obviously even more intimidating for an undergraduate as well. So I think that's an example of the things that vendors working in the space, whether they are solution providers like us or publishers, need to work to resolve in partnership with universities as well, because it's not a strong experience at all.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, Sam, Ian, Jamie, and Matt, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. You just heard from Samantha Sharman, who is currently a student at the University of Lincoln, a public research university in Lincoln, England. Jamie Wood, professor of history and education at the University of Lincoln. Ian Snowley, Dean of Student Learning Development and University Librarian at the University of Lincoln. And Matt Hayes, Managing Director of Technology at Sage Publishing. This series is brought to you with support from Sage Publishing. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.